Welcome back, MTG Joe here. We're here for another installment of the weekly meta breakdown where we look at the best performing decks on the MTG Arena ladder. For this one, we're going to be focusing on Timeless Best of One. We're going to try to get back into the rotation of all the formats. Since the new set comes out next week, I'll probably just wait on Standard to the following week. We did a metagame breakdown for the metagame challenge, so kind of put that on a hiatus, but we'll focus on the other decks, other formats leading up to it as well. Just to kind of preface, I'm still recovering from surgery, so if the video, like audio, me talking is a little off, I'm still trying to catch my breath, so bear with me for another week or so as I kind of get back into the rhythm of things. But Timeless has continued to be my favorite format, and we're going to cover a bunch of different decks here. We're getting the data from Untapped GG, what you see on the screen, companion tool that runs alongside Arena's clients, aggregates your win rates with other users, gives us a whole bunch of cool stats. Link for Untapped is in the video description. I'll paste all these deck lists with timestamps as well, so you can just copy and paste to your heart's content. One note, for whatever reason, Untapped will not categorize Titanfield decks. I raised a ticket, I gotta follow up with them to see what's happening there. But Titanfield is not being considered in this population set. Outside of that, I will list a Titanfield deck that has been doing well, just for a point of reference. We're going to start off with looking at the popularity, what we're seeing on the ladder from Diamond to Mythic Rank, kind of get a distribution of decks, and then we'll look at the win rates themselves as we kind of go through. So in terms of what you're most likely to see, Rakdos Burn has taken the mantle at highest win rate deck at 18%, or highest popularity, sorry. Not win rate necessarily. 18%. We've had mono black controls. There's kind of two versions. There's like ring control. There's the devotion list. I was having a lot of success this month with devotion. I was playing that. That's what I got mythic with. We have Rakdos Breach. We have mono red burn, which is kind of two variants, like the 16 line. There's actually a 10 line version that I featured on my YouTube as well. That was off a user from Reddit. Then there's Dimir Dredge at like 6%, domain 5%, Rakdos midrange 4.6, Jund midrange 3.2. I will say for like this week, Dimir Dredge is like low 50s, like 53% win rate. Jund midrange is like 50%. Traditional Rakdos midrange is sub 50%. So a lot of these like red-black midrange kind of fair decks have slightly fallen off in the last week, given the prevalence of increased amount of burn, as well as these like dark ritual kind of go over the top, like turn one necropotent style strategies. In terms of just like the trends, we're seeing a big drop for Rakdos Burn and then kind of it reestablishing itself. Similarly, we see the mono black control kind of normalize as being earlier in the month one of the kind of go-to decks. We're seeing a slight increase in the domain deck, then it kind of falls down, and we're seeing like Dimir Dredge also follow a similar suit. In terms of like popularity of some of the other decks, we're not seeing too much representation, just being small meta percentages, but we'll jump into it. We are going to look Diamond to Mythic Rank, 20,000 games, January 22nd through to the 29th. I got the cap at 50 games just to see what's coming in. Again, obviously, bigger population is going to give us a bigger sample, but we're also doing a format that's not as heavily played as Standard. And because the format's still new, I like doing a smaller cap. It gives us more diversity. If we look at the game, like decks featured, if we go to 100, it's only 4 decks. We go to 200, it's 1 deck. So this gives us an idea of at least what people are trying and seeing deviations in terms of, you know, there's Rakdos Burn, but there's a 16-line version, there's an 18-line version, there's a 10-line version. There's some that are on like the full Saga package, there's some that aren't. Some are in DRC, some aren't. So it's kind of giving us an idea of what's happening there. So the highest win rate deck, they call it Dimir Shadow, but it's actually Dimir Tainted Pact. It's a Luris companion deck. For whatever reason, the Tainted Pact decks get tagged as Shadow. So this one's at 71% with 59 matches. And the kind of core of this deck, you'll notice this looks like a commander deck with one-ofs. It's because Tainted Pact requires you to play every card in your deck, including Lions, has to be a one-of outside of Thassa's Oracle. So what you do is basically set up, it's a control deck, control your opponent, find your combo pieces. You can either Tainted Pact to find your Thassa's Oracle, and then you have your second Tainted Pact, but ideally what you do is you cast Thassa's Oracle, the trigger on the stack, you Tainted Pact, exile your entire library, the trigger goes off, you win the game. So kind of the idea there. Otherwise it's Dimir Shell, basically just hand hate, counters, removal, and then card manipulation, either card draw, things like Soren's Ransom, stuff of that nature. Luris kind of in there. You'll notice the mana base is just a whole bunch of random one-ofs. You'll also be playing Snow Covered and just basics. That's the easiest way to kind of tell if you're against the Tainted Pact deck. If you see like a Snow basic or like some of these weird lands like a Temple of Deceit type strategy, it's usually indicative of that. This deck I find kind of tilting just because you know they're playing one-ofs and they always lead off against you with like turn 1 Thoughtseize, turn 2 Bowmaster. They just kind of always combo you out that way there. But this is a deck, it's a lot of clicking, so be mindful. You got to click through your whole deck. You can let your timer expire and then it'll pass through your whole deck, but if you're playing it, just click, kind of go from there. The next deck is Mono Black Control. So this is the version that is non-devotion. I'll show you my devotion list as well. That's kind of going from there. So the kind of core of this deck is leveraging Dark Ritual, which this turns out this card is pretty good. When you could turn 1, get 3+ mana if you get multiples, but Dark Ritual into Necropotence gets you a whole bunch of card advantage. You can also turn 2 One Ring or Shieldred, even potentially turn 1. I had a few games where I turned one Ring in my deck as well, and you just kind of run away with things. This version here has got a little bit more hand hate, so between Duress and Inquisition. Notably no Thoughtseize because it hurts your life for Necropotence. March of Wretched Sorrows, the big kind of removal spell, gains you a bunch of life. What you can do is you can set a stop at your end step, draw like 10 cards with Necropotence, get the cards into your hand before you pass turn to discard. You can pitch all those extra cards to March of Wretched Sorrow, and then deal a whole bunch of extra damage. Full Fatal Push package, some Edicts, Bowmaster, Demonic Tutor. Your main win condition in this deck pretty much is the Shieldred, or like Karn package. You could win with like Bowmasters or just, you know, emotionally destroying your opponent by drawing so many cards. The Karn board gets you access to Chalice of the Void, Pithing Needle, Liquid Metal Coating, can blow up their lands or shut off activated abilities. Sky Sovereign's another win condition, can blow up stuff. Citadel to play stuff off the top. Platinum Angel kind of locks out some decks. It's not as good in this format as like others because a lot of like the decks, like Burn can just kill it through like 2 burn spells. Bezeju's quite common in some of these decks. Like there's ways that they can get around it. Cityscape Leveler's another win condition of the deck. So there's that version of the deck. It doesn't show like the largest sample here because I've been playing mostly on my iPad. Recovering in bed playing some Magic, but this version here, I started with Elliott Dragon's list, and I kind of tweaked it from there. So this version here, you're playing Leyline of the Void, which you can turn 0, which just wins against some decks, against Dredge. Really neuters the Breach decks, kind of playing from there. And you could, as early as turn 2, start generating net mana with the combination of Sunken Citadel on 1, Nykthos on 2 with a Leyline. If you have 2 Leylines out, then on turn 2 you could generate 4 mana, just like that. I kind of tweaked some of the numbers. So you still have Dark Ritual, 3-4 split with the March of Wretched Sorrow. The Bowmasters, Meat Hook's been pretty solid with a lot of the Ghost-wide strategies. Helps gain life against like big turns from Titan Field decks, stuff of that nature. The card I was trying out recently is a one of Preacher of Schism. I wanted another card that I could turn 1 Dark Ritual off of as a creature that could be a blocker that didn't die to Lightning Bolt. While it could still die to push, this one is reasonable offense, defense, has some utility there. Played some games with it, liked it. Was it the best card in the world? No, but it did its job. Ashiok, I went to 3. Well, it's super impressive against decks like Field. In like the Domain deck, it's okay because you can shut off their fetches, but if you don't get it on turn 1, it's a little far behind, and they have big creatures. Shieldred 2 of, One Ring 2 of, Karn 2 of, and then the main way you win with this version is Grey Merchant of Asphodel. Huge swings of life. I had to turn a game, my winning in for Mythic, I cast 4 Grey Merchants, and I chained 3 together in a turn with just tons of devotion and 2 Nykthos, which is kind of sweet from there. My sideboard, I'm using Tormod's Crypt for instant graveyard hate, Grafdigger's Cage to shut off any search effects or cards from the library, activated abilities Pithing Needle, Dampening Spheres for Necropotence decks, like a Necrostorm, or any kind of like multi-spell deck. We'll see Phoenix in a bit, like any decks like that. Well, it does shut off your Nykthos. It makes their deck worse. So even if they're using Beseech, it taxes them on the Beseech as well. Liquid Metal Coating, another copy of the One Ring in the sideboard to fetch, and then Wormcoil Engine. I don't really like the Angel or the Cityscape Leveler. I think that they're big mana, but oftentimes just Wormcoil, you slap it down against like Mono Red Burn or something like that, and it just runs away with a lot of the games. I have a video of this if you want to see it as well on the channel, but this is like my go-to deck. For the metagame challenge, I'm just going to make this a best of 3 deck and kind of go from there. We then go to Rakdos Burn. So this is the 19 land. So we've got it. Players are playing more lands, which thankfully. So this actually looks like my version. This is my version. I was on the Searing Bloods main. So this is the version of Burn I was playing. I took the 16 land version. I didn't really like the 16 land version because you often miss line drops, and I think it's important to get to 2 to 3 lines at least. That deck also played way too many pain lines that it hurts your Eidolon. The big thing with this version, you have Dragon Rage Chandler as well as the Bauble that gets you kind of go over the top, helps fuel your draws. Searing Blood is really useful to both handle opponent's creatures, but also continually push damage. There's a contention point with things like Play with Fire of do you point face, do you kill their creature. This allows you to do both. Skewer was kind of the weakest card in the deck, I found, because we're not all in on like the Spectacle route. You usually want to cast spells either before or during combat to trigger prowess, so trim down the number of those, but like Bowmaster's really strong. Eidolon can lock out your opponent against some of the Storm decks. Just 2 Regavans because the format tends to be a pretty abrasive to Regavan right now. A lot of Bowmasters, a lot of just bigger creatures, but this deck can hit hard pretty fast. You'll notice 8 fetches here for 6 lands. That's because you want to enable Delirium as much as possible in this deck. We then go to 5-color Domain Zoo, 64%, and kind of this one's got some updates since. So the core is still in place. You have your Wild Nacatls, your Burn with Tribal Flames and Lightning Bolts, your Territorial Kavus, your Nishiba Brawlers, your Bowmasters, your Stubborn Denials, as well as Leyline Binding, dropping the Oko completely in favor of Inti. And I think Inti's really smart in this deck. You oftentimes will have just like dead cards in hand, maybe like fetches that no longer have suitable fetch targets, or you kind of flood out. This can turn that into card advantage, but notably it can give trample. So you have very large creatures in this deck. Well, give your Territorial Kavu trample and go to town with it. As well as Jarsoul, that then lets you rebuy some of those effects, a lot of cheap spells. So rebuying your Lightning Bolts, rebuying your Tribal Flames, all very effective. The one thing I'll say, I did prefer to have a Stomping Ground in the mana base. A lot of them don't. There's a lot of times I wanted a red-green land off my fetch, so again, it's just personal preference. The one thing that's missing in this, you could play Jangantha. It's not added here, but play Jangantha. It's a free companion in this deck, and it also helps you play around Blood Moon. Moving on, we go to Izzet Tempo. So this is, we haven't had an Izzet decks in a while, so an actual Blood Moon deck. 61%, and this is kind of the Blue Moon deck of the format. This would be like your Murktide deck if we had Murktide on the format. DRCs, Regavans as 4-ofs. You have Ledger Shredder in here as well. And then 2 of Blood Moon. A lot of cheap interaction. Lightning Bolts. You have Unholy Heats. Expressive Iteration for some card advantage. So you can kind of play a threat, protect it with like Spell Pierces, counter spells, then refill your hand. You do have access to 7 1-mana removals plus 2 Stern Scoldings. So the big thing with this deck, you're very soft to Bowmaster in the sense that if a Bowmaster resolves, it hurts you a lot, but you have a lot of ways to kind of play. So it's proactively using your Brainstorm potentially on turn 1, or just making sure you can respond to a Bowmaster in response to one of your card draw triggers. Mana base wise, just a lot of fetches. And then you're like 6 lands, some Spire Bluffs, and an Otawara in there. Sorry, just catching my breath. Rakdos Breach, 60%. Been speaking to some folks that they've been finding that the Breach decks kind of let them down the last week or so. I still think the deck's inherently powerful. I've found it pretty easy to beat from the Devotion side, but like I'm also playing Ashiok's as well as Leylines and like a Karn board to hate on them and just a lot of cheap removal, so it could be incidental, but kind of the core of the deck, you have a fair game package of like Deathrite Shaman, or actually they've moved off Ragavan to Deathrite Shaman, which is I think the correct way. I don't think Ragavan does enough in the deck. Deathrite helps you ramp and just provides like a different angle of attack. So like you could just go fair, like Deathrite, DRC, beatdowns, you have Hand Hate, Bowmasters, the Diabolic Intent can help you find your Breach, and then what you kind of want to do is just keep filling your graveyard, so either DRC, recasting Dark Rituals from your graveyard, through the Breach, exiling stuff. If you could recast Stitcher Supplier multiple times and then like sack it to like Diabolic Intent or the Phyrexian Tower, whatever it may be. Generate enough gas, play enough cards, and then you Tendrils of Agony your opponent out to death. Moving on, we go to Izzet Phoenix. So one of the first Phoenix lists we've seen on here. Phoenix is a deck that very powerful, but it is a little soft to Bowmaster. Same idea as like that Izzet Blood Moon deck. You have 8 pieces of removal here. This version is playing like Faithless Looting and Consider and Brainstorm. So we are a little softer here to a Bowmaster if it does resolve. Similarly like the Full Treasure Cruise. But what you want to do is throw your Arclights into the graveyard and then play 3 instants or sorceries, get them back, and just kind of get reoccurring value out of it. A lot of cheap, effective ways to do so, and you're able to kind of go over the top and control in that sense. Here's the mono red burn deck. So someone posted on Reddit, MTG Jank Tank, I think it was. They had like a 63% win rate up to Mythic. I played 8 games with it. I went 6-2. My 2 losses were basically if they didn't have it that turn, I win the next turn. So very, very close. Could have gone either way. But it's a 10-land deck. And it's playing like fetches. So the one thing I kind of, from playing this, I think it's better to just not play Luris. Just play like 8 mountains, 2 fetches, and leave it at that. But you're using things like Wayward Guide Beast. So you can play a land, play a spell, whatever. Then play Wayward Guide Beast, you attack in. You can return that same land. So I won multiple games with 1 land, just recycling that line. So like pre-combat, you play a spell, attack with Way Beast, return that line to hand, replay that line, so you can still double spell a lot. So you have your package with like DRC, Bauble, stuff like that. You have Bowmat Courier in here. Fur of Terror of the Bitten, +2/2 attacks each combat. Slap that on Guide Beast and it just goes to town. Spear Spewer as a cheap way to enable Spectacle, kind of going from there. So this was kind of a sweet one. Like I said, you can check out the list, see it in action. It seems odd, but like I said, I was like laughing and just surprised at how many games we won with 1 land against like all the like a bunch of top decks, kind of going from there. I just want to show like the Dimir Dredge decks at 53%. This has been one of the top decks in past weeks. It's kind of fallen down in terms of popularity, or in terms of win rate. Popularity is still kind of there, but I get frustrated with playing this deck because I feel like you lose to yourself more than you lose to your opponent. And like you could play the optimal lines, but it's very dependent on what you flip. You can have games where like Stitcher on 1 hits you like the nuts, and you get back like a Silver Smoke Ghoul, Creeping Chill, Prized Amalgam on turn 1 or something like that. And you have other games where it's like you've gone through 2/3 of your deck and you haven't hit any of your key cards, or you just don't hit you hit all your Creeping Chills, then your Silver Smokes type thing. Kind of going from there. Lastly, we have the Mono Green Titanless. This one's 49.27 by Wuggles. Kind of core stock list: the Boreal Grazers, Commies, a couple Elvish Rejuvenators, Primeval Titan, and Titan of Industry. You were just playing a bunch of lands in this deck, Naturaling Order them out, Spelunking to untap. This version's actually on Karn, the Great Creator, which I think is an interesting angle as well. It's less all in on the deck. It does give you access to like Graveyard Hate, Might, Liquid Metal Coating, Stonebraid for combo, Thorn of the Amethyst for Storm decks, Wormcoil Engine, and Cityscape Leveler. So interesting version that way there. You can see some without it that are playing Craterhoof Behemoth. But the core of the deck is you try to get out Primeval Titan as early as possible, and then just start getting Field of the Dead tokens. You do have the Hamor Battlements, and then Stomping Ground to give your subsequent Titans haste. So comes into play, gets 2 lands, give a haste, get 2 more lands right away as well. So that's it for the week. Let me know what you think, what you've been playing, what you've been enjoying, and we'll catch you next time. Thanks for watching.